It is I, survived the Jive. Historian, filmmaker, all-round good guy. I'm back again, and I'm here today to talk about Celsus, who is an interesting figure. I read his book earlier this year, The Fragments of Celsus. He's very controversial. At the time, he became even more controversial over time, and even today remains controversial. But before I get into that, I'd like you all please to first watch this short advertisement. Just take me a moment to get it. No, that's not it. Alright, that's about my book. Every year as Christmas comes, Yule comes in, I have to talk about my amazing picture book, storybook, suitable for children. It is a wonderful present that you can get for any young members of your family, or you can buy it for yourself and enjoy it. It has a lot of information in it, it's thoroughly researched, everything you need to know about the pagan origins of Christmas or Yule, but presented in the amusing and fun format of a ghost story with the folk horror style, very similar to Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. It's a great time of year, and I hope that more people enjoy it and enjoy the knowing about the pagan origins of it. Now, you can buy them on that website, smiletitans.com. There's a link in the description of this stream. Don't be alarmed that the prices are in Canadian dollars. That's just because the artist is Canadian. You will be charged in your normal currencies, and the actual English and American currency prices are written there, and all orders are completed inside Europe and sent out from Latvia. Thank you for that super chat from Double Dog. Always appreciated. When he says, "I'm pleased you were able to survive and make it back to civilization when your plane crash landed in the Jive, but how long are you going to let that one event define you as a person and as a channel?" Well, when something like that happens, you have to just it defines you forever, I suppose. Anyway, to this topic at hand tonight, I want to talk about how the findings that came out recently, and I did a blog at the beginning of the month on 8th November about the Roman DNA paper that came out, and what I think they inform my opinion of some of the religious changes that happened in the Roman Empire as well, and I just thought I'd do a nice stream about it. The first 30 minutes will be available for all, and the spicier bits will be behind a paywall. You have to be signed up to Patreon or Subscribestar to get the whole stream and know what I'm talking about. So let's begin. Before I get into Celsus, and I want to have a go at St. Paul and his sermon at the Areopagus, and I want to talk about the Chaldeans and the Chaldean, the Bible of the Neoplatonists, as it's called, the book of the Chaldean oracles. But so first off, let's just talk about the paper. So I'll just go to display capture so you can see what I'm talking about. Well, this is the paper, Ancient Rome, A Genetic Crossroads of Europe and the Mediterranean. A lot of people were talking about it on Twitter and all around, talking about what it showed, and of course the media spun it as Rome was multicultural. Actually, that's true, it was multicultural, but their reasons for portraying it a certain way might not be to get people to understand exactly what happened. That's not the right one. That's for later. So here's a nice little GIF on my blog about it. I did this blog to try and summarize everything. And you can see the PCA and the map of Europe reflecting the changes that happened over the ages. Basically, the most interesting parts we're going to talk about are the Roman Republic time and compared to the Imperial times. But initially you have a Mesolithic population, hunter-gatherers like everywhere. The Neolithic, then you get the Anatolians coming into all of Europe, and they're much the same in Italy elsewhere. The Iron Age and Republic Rome is the introduction. Well, over the Bronze Age, you have the introduction of basically steppe DNA. So that means a more northerly population coming into Italy and bringing some kind of what we think of as like European or Central Northern European DNA that made the pre-imperial Roman samples plot more like more northern than modern Italians or Neolithic ones. So the Neolithic people are quite like the Sardinians or Etruscans in Italy, and then later you get like this Indo-European northern DNA come in, and so that meant that Republican Rome is they're kind of genetically similar to people in France, southern France. And that makes sense because we often talk about how the phenotypical descriptions of Romans sound more northerly than what we might expect from the Mediterranean. But that is because they were a bit more northerly. However, Imperial Rome is quite a different story. Basically, the Imperial times result in a massive immigration of more southerly shifted or easterly shifted peoples. So we're talking about people from the Roman Empire, but at its height, across, from going all the way from the border of Scotland out into the Levantine regions and parts of Africa, there weren't immigrants coming to Rome from all over the empire. There weren't as many Gauls and Britons coming in, or Spaniards even coming in. The majority of the people coming in during the Imperial era were coming from urban areas, and the only urbanized parts of the world in the ancient times were around the Near East. So we had a lot of Greeks and Anatolians and maybe even further away, like Levantines and North Africans, Egyptians, all of them coming into Rome. So basically, there were. What reasons would these Middle Eastern people have for moving into Italy? Well, there was economic opportunities. That sounds like a very similar model. Don't we see that in the day, have a European population build a civilization, and then you get an influx of Middle Eastern people? It doesn't sound so dissimilar to things we've seen in modern times. But what's also interesting is that following that, the era of the medieval times, you have a shift back to a European, more European immigrants when you get the Celts and the Germans invading Rome, basically. And the result is that medieval Rome's a different story. And this wasn't from the paper. This is from the paper, but someone's added in these white bits saying about inferring religious changes in that time. So first you got Western hunter-gatherers like Cheddaman, then you've got the Neolithic farmers from Anatolia throughout the Copper Age. The Iron Age and the Republic, that's when you get this 72% of component of what is like a more northerly European-like people coming in. And this is associated with the introduction of Indo-European religion, so Jupiter and Mars would be worshipped by that. The influx of Near Easterners bringing cults of things like from the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East, you've got like Mithras from Iran, Cybele from Anatolia, Isis from Egypt coming in the Imperial Roman era, and the overall genetic makeup of Rome is changed significantly. It reflects changes in the religion as well. That's quite interesting to me, because of course there's all sorts of mystery cults occurring in Imperial Rome as well. So is that reflecting all these immigrants changing the nature of Rome itself? I think it is, and I think that I'm going to argue something about how Neoplatonists and the Christians and the cult of Mithras are all playing into a response and a reaction to the events of this time. So we've got all that time is the time of Christianity as well. Late antiquity, it says, well, Christianity is coming in, but actually the Imperial era already has a lot of Jews and Christians around in that time. So late antiquity usually means the 4th to 6th centuries. But actually, Imperial Rome, you've got a lot of problems with Christians, and that's what Celsus was talking about. Celsus was alive in... He wrote his On the True Doctrine, which is a critique of Christianity, around somewhere between 175 and 177 AD. So that's long before late antiquity. So, I mean, okay, medieval and early modern, when it's a Christian Rome, that's when there's actually the most Germanic and sort of thing happening. And now modern Romans are a bit, more recently they got a bit more shifted away from that. But basically, where do I begin? Well, I think the next thing to do is to talk about Celsus and just to talk about what he was reacting against. Here I am again. Now, I've got some comments to read. Can you get the book in different languages? Andreas Cortes, no, you cannot. You cannot get it in different languages. It's only available in English, I'm afraid. Harry Quinn, here's a pint on me, lad. Thanks, Harry. And The Individuous. What are your thoughts on Tuatha De Danann and the mythology that the Irish and Scottish are descended from an Egyptian princess and Scythian prince? Well, I've already said many, many times that stuff about the Scoti and the Scythians is completely wrong. And I've said it in lectures and I've said it in streams. So if anyone's not heard it, there is a medieval motif of ascribing Eastern origins to people. It is not factual. It is not factual. The Welsh are not Trojans. The Scots are not Scythians. That can be seen in DNA. This trope is known about. Medieval historians have known about it long before we had DNA evidence to prove that it was nonsense, but we didn't need that DNA evidence. No one was looking for that DNA evidence because no one believed it was real. It's simply not true. So, yeah, please don't think that you know better than every single medieval historian who says that this stuff that Snorri says about the gods being Turks and whatever is nonsense. They know what they're talking about. I'm telling you now, I'm going to tell you again, I don't want to answer any more questions because I've said it so many times. The Eastern origin myth is not real. It's not a real thing. When they say that they are Hebrews or Trojans or Scythians or any time that a Western European people tries to invent an Eastern origin, it's just about trying to give themselves some dignity because they don't remember what they really were. And that was the meme of the time where everyone was saying to be cool, you have to be Greek or Roman or something that's written in the Bible like the Scythians or Hittites or something. So that's it. Double Dog says, why do they keep telling us we need to spice up our culture? We already have the Italians. Okay, very funny. All right, we're going to go now to some serious stuff. So Celsus, he was a 2nd century Greek philosopher. At the time, Greece was part of Roman Empire. And, of course, this is the time when you're getting a lot of movements of people. You're getting a lot of Jews and Syrians and whatever coming into the Roman Empire, into the Western Mediterranean. And a lot of Christians starting to take off. Christianity's getting to be a popular religion. And he wrote this book on the True Doctrine, where he criticized Christianity and Jews, but mainly Christianity. But that book was very unpopular, and it was banned in 448 AD by order of Valentinian III. and Theodosius II, but it had been formally suppressed by the Christian community, who were against anyone criticising them. But we still have bits of it, which I have here in the fragments of Celsus. The fragments were put together because of a chap called Origen. And Origen is a guy who was a Christian. So Origen made basically a retort to he wrote a retort to the work of Celsus on the true doctrine, a refutation called Contra Celsum. It was in 248, so long after Celsus was dead, so he couldn't respond to it. But because it has quite large passages from Celsus in it, we've got a lot about. We can therefore see what this banned work by Celsus was. Now, let me just tell you something about Origen. This is a picture of him. You might have seen this in memes and stuff. Origen paid someone to castrate him when he was young. This was a thing with Middle East and Near Eastern cults, like the cult of Cybele. The priests of the cult of Cybele had to be castrated. And Christianity, being similar to that, a Near Eastern cult, had this anti-sex thing and this emasculated male kind of aspects. And so, for some reason, he, being influenced by these Near Eastern cults, had himself castrated. This is a medieval depiction where, in the medieval times, there's several depictions of him where he's castrating himself, which is a slight variation on the actual story of him paying someone to castrate him, a surgeon to do it. The priests of Cybele would have been ritually castrated. So maybe some of the priests of Christ were also castrated. Very different to what was considered normal Roman religion. Although Cybele's cult was eventually accepted in Rome, there were many who were against it as a foreign religion. Same with Christianity. But, yeah, bit of a weirdo then, this Origen chap. Celsus, the only problem with this book, well, one of the problems with it is that, obviously, if you're Origen and you want to write a whole retort to all the things that Celsus said in his book that you disagree with, you're going to focus on the things that you can beat him on, aren't you? You're going to focus on the things that he got wrong. Now, Celsus he got some good criticisms of Christianity in here. It's a good book, but also some of them can be some of his arguments can be quite easily dismissed by a knowledgeable Christian, because some of them show that he actually doesn't fully understand Christian theology, doesn't really understand some of the actual beliefs of Christians. So he's the arguments aren't that great. Now, obviously, those are the arguments of Celsus that Origen would choose to argue against. Now, any of probably the best arguments that Celsus made won't have been included in it, because he couldn't think of a retort to them. But in here, some very strong arguments as well. Maybe I should just read a few of them. That sounds like a good idea to get started. So he believed in what he called the true doctrine. Right? The book was called The True Doctrine. That wasn't referring to Christianity. That was referring to what he believed, which is that. And by the way, Origen claimed that Celsus was a Epicurean, which is like rationalists or whatever, but he wasn't at all. The Epicureans were against the Platonists, and a lot of this really corresponds quite closely with Platonic beliefs or Neoplatonic beliefs. I don't think he was a Neoplatonist exactly, but the only other Roman at the time who was doing a really big critique of Christianity that we still have is that of Porphyry, and Porphyry was a Neoplatonist. So the Neoplatonists were, against Christianity, and they were doing good arguments against it, even though Christianity was itself then influenced by Neoplatonism. But of course, Emperor Julian, the famous Roman emperor who to oppose Christianity and to try to restore paganism, was himself a Neoplatonist. But I don't think Celsus was, strictly speaking, a Platonist of any sort, but not an Epicurean either. He believed in the ancient logos. His idea is that there was an ancient primordial religion which was understood by different religions, like a truth. And that was the real thing. That's the real doctrine that everyone should believe in. Very similar to what Perennius believed now, isn't it? Interesting. Here's a little take from him. The wisest of the nations doesn't mean countries, it means like races, peoples. You know? The wisest of the nations, cities, and men in every age have held by certain general principles of thought and action to this ancient tradition the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Persians and Indians, the Samothracians and the Druids alike adhere. But the Jews and Moses have no part nor lot in it. Now, so basically every single culture in history has understood this wisdom except the Jews. So he is clearly very critical of Jews. However, the book doesn't actually include much of his criticisms of Jews. In fact, a lot of his arguments that he uses against Christianity, he makes those criticisms from the perspective of a Jew. So he says, if I was a Jew, these are valid criticisms I could launch against Christianity. And he goes through them from that perspective. I'm not sure why he chose to do that. Like, that might be because he thought that would be because Christianity was so dependent on the opinion of what was Orthodox Jewry at the time. So yeah, the book is not anti-Jew, but Celsus was very critical of Jews. It's just a very strong argument. It's very strongly a book against Christianity, or the fragments that we have remaining are anyway. Now, let me get some more quotes from this. He didn't think much of the theological difference between Jews and Christians. He says, the conflict between Jews and Christians is a silly conflict. It may fitly be compared to the proverbial fight about the shadow of an ass. The point at issue is of no weight. Both believe in the predictions of the coming of a saviour to mankind. They only differ as to whether or not he has come. What do we got? He believed that the Jews came from Egypt and that they were in fact Egyptians, and then they made everything up about their origins besides that. He thinks they were just Egyptians. It is strange that the Jews should worship the heavens and the angels therein, while they pass by the most august parts of it, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Is it reasonable to regard the whole as God, and its parts as not divine? He actually much prefers Jews to Christians. He prefers them because he says here, the Jews, like other separate nationalities, have established laws according to their national genius, and preserve a form of worship which has at least the merit of being ancestral and national. For each nation has its own institutions, whatever they chance to be. This seems an expedient arrangement, not only because different minds think differently, and because it is our duty to preserve what has been established in the interests of the state, but also because in all probability the parts of the earth were originally allotted to different overseers, and are now administered accordingly. To do what is pleasing to these overseers is to do what is right. To abolish the institutions that have existed in each place from the first is impiety. So he's saying like the gods have sorted it all out. Every different people has their own part in the world, and that's the proper natural order, according to Celsus. It is impiety to suppose that the great God, so he does believe in the concept like the Neoplatonists do of one God greater than all. And when he hears the Jews or Christians speak of God, he doesn't criticize that they believe in one great God, but he does criticize their anthropomorphic tendencies, impositions onto that being, to say that it was made in man's image or that it creates things other to itself. That becomes theologically absurd. So it is impiety to suppose that the great God is weary or works with his hand or issues commands. He has neither voice nor mouth, nor has he anything of those which we know. Nor did he make man in his image, for God is not such as man, nor is he like any other form, for he has no part in outward shape, or colour, or movement, or substance. You can see it's like a frustrated man seeing this cult that's completely alien to the Roman traditions. And Rome itself changing entirely with the introduction of these foreign religions, like Judaism, Christianity, etc. Which is in contrast to the Neoplatonists, who, although they opposed Christianity, they were much more, I think they took a lot of influence from the in newcomers from the Imperial era, and positive influence. So it's kind of a contrast of positives and negatives of the immigration that an imperial state will receive. But I guess actually the ideas that the Neoplatonists took weren't from immigrants. They were directly from the provinces of the empire. The Chaldeans as Middle Eastern people, and they didn't come as immigrants to. Chaldean can just refer to anyone who's an astrologer, really. It doesn't actually have to refer to a race. So you get the picture a bit. You get some of the picture about Celsus, and I'm coming up to the end now. And before of this section. So before I go, I'll continue talking about what I think St. Paul's sermon was kind of like a bit like a weak version, like a weak equivalent to Celsus's A Critique of Christianity. St. Paul's attempt to criticize paganism shows his utter ignorance of pagan theology, utter ignorance. And I'll also talk about the Chaldean oracles and the influence on Neoplatonism a bit in the second half for all the patrons. Quickly just do a reading of any super chats before I go. Sick Lid, $5. Will you be flagged for showing these pictures? Which pictures? Which pictures? They're medieval manuscripts. It's an educational video. I should think it's fine. Oregon was anathematized by St. Justinian at the Sixth Council. He's more representative of Alexandrian Neoplatonism than second century Christianity, says Womp Womp. Well, I don't know if that's true, really, because Neoplatonists were against Christianity, and he was a Christian, so he was a defender of Christianity. So, also, there's no necessity for becoming a gelding for Neoplatonists. They would be against that. Did Italo-Celtic, $5, did your account on academia.edu get reinstated? Yes, it did. Thank you very much for your concern, and thank you to anyone who wrote to academia to restore my account, which was obviously flagged by mass reporting from some malicious subversive groups, trolls of the left, but they failed in their attempts to unperson me from the internet, thankfully. Okay, I think that's all of them. Yeah, okay then. Well, good night to those who are not patrons, and to those who are, I'll see you shortly in the next half.